You did not stumble upon this message by chance. No, my dear reader, something beyond your understanding has drawn you here. There is a whisper in the depths of your soul, a call that has echoed since the dawn of time, waiting for you to listen. A great transformation is unfolding. You are not merely flesh and blood, bound by the mundane worries of this world. You have crossed an invisible threshold, stepping into a reality far greater than the one you once knew. The veil is lifting, and the limitations that once defined you are beginning to crumble. Can you feel it? The stirring of something ancient, something eternal. The universe has not abandoned you to the ordinary. Rather, it is awakening you to the extraordinary. The question is, will you step forward? Will you embrace the truth of who you were always meant to be? The call to transformation, a journey beyond the veil. It was not by chance that you have come to hear this message. You may think it was a simple coincidence, a moment in time like any other, but I tell you, it is not so. The one who formed the stars and set the foundations of the world has guided you here. The words you are about to hear are not mere human wisdom. They are the echoes of something far greater, something ancient yet ever new. A transformation is unfolding, stretching beyond mere mortals' reach. You are no longer merely human. No, the hands of the eternal potter are reshaping you into something beyond your own imagining. Just as the caterpillar does not realize it is destined for wings, so too do you stand on the edge of a divine transition. The veil between what you were and what you are becoming is thinner than you know. Consider the story of Saul of Tarsus, a man who once breathed threats against the followers of Christ. He was certain, utterly convinced, that his understanding of righteousness was correct. But on the road to Damascus, a light brighter than the noonday sun struck him blind, and in that blindness he saw the truth for the first time. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" The voice of Christ shattered everything he thought he knew. In a moment, the hunter became the hunted, and the man who sought to destroy faith became one of its greatest champions. You see, transformation is not simply about changing one's habits or improving one's character. It is a death and a resurrection. The old self must be laid down so that the new creation may rise. "Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it," Christ declared. This is the paradox of the kingdom of heaven. To be truly alive, one must first die. Perhaps you feel the stirrings of this transformation within you. You sense that the life you have known is not enough, that there is something greater calling to you from beyond the veil. You are not mistaken. The whispers of eternity are reaching out, beckoning you to step forward, to leave behind the shadowlands and walk into the light. "Behold, I am making all things new," says the Lord, and that includes you. It is easy to resist such change. The familiar is comforting, even when it is broken. Like the Israelites longing for Egypt, we cling to our chains because we know them well. But the promised land is before you. The voice of God calls, not from the past, but from the future He has prepared. "Come, follow me." This is not a message of mere inspiration, it is a summons. You were not made for the dust alone, but for the breath of God within you. You were not formed to wander in darkness, but to be a child of light. The choice stands before you, just as it stood before the rich young ruler, just as it stood before Peter when he first stepped onto the waves, to remain or to follow, to cling to the known or to trust the one who makes all things new. You are not merely a spectator in this divine drama. You have been chosen, summoned, called by name. The time of transformation is now. Do not turn away from the one who calls. Step forward into the great unknown, into the arms of the one who has loved you since before the foundations of the world were laid. The veil is lifting, the journey begins. Will you follow? The end of human limitation. Elijah had always known the weight of his own limitations. They clung to him like shackles, unseen yet heavy. He had spent years seeking answers in books, in doctrines, in whispered prayers that often felt like they dissipated into the void. But on this night, everything changed. It was not in a grand cathedral or in the solitude of the wilderness that he found himself standing at the threshold of something greater. It was in a simple, quiet place. A garden just outside his home, where the stars above seemed to burn brighter than ever before. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, and though he saw no figure before him, he knew he was not alone. "Elijah!" the voice called, deep yet gentle, reverberating through his very being. It was not the voice of mere sound, but of truth itself, woven into the fabric of his soul. He fell to his knees, trembling. "Who are you?" "I am the one who has always been," the voice replied. "The one you have sought in silence and longing. You have reached the end of yourself. Now you must step beyond." A warmth unlike anything he had ever known coursed through him, unraveling every doubt, every burden. His mind, once clouded with uncertainty, now saw with clarity. The world he had known was but a shadow of something far greater. He had spent his life bound by human frailties, fear, pride, reason too small to grasp the infinite. But now they were fading, dissolving like mist before the morning sun. "But how?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do I step beyond?" "You were never meant to carry the weight alone," the voice said. "You have limited yourself to what your eyes see and your hands touch, but I have given you more. Faith is not a blind leap, Elijah. It is the awakening of sight." Elijah felt it then, an expansion of his soul. The universe around him was not chaos, not randomness, but a grand design, aligning with every prayer, every longing that had been placed in his heart. The stars were not distant lights. They were the echoes of something eternal, singing of a reality beyond flesh and time. His burdens fell away, not because they ceased to exist, but because he finally understood. He had spent his life asking for deliverance, never realizing that the door had always been open. It had never been about striving, it had been about surrender. "You have always been with me," Elijah murmured, the realization sinking deep. "As I have always been with all who seek me," the voice answered. "But seeking is not enough. You must now walk in the truth you have been given." And suddenly he knew. The knowledge did not come as a series of instructions or commandments, but as a living understanding, as natural as breathing. He was no longer merely a man burdened by limits. He was part of something divine. His prayers were not cries cast into an empty sky, but threads woven into the great tapestry of eternity. "Elijah," the voice called once more, "go now, walk in the power that has always been yours." As the presence faded, he stood, not the same man who had entered the garden. He was lighter yet stronger. He looked at the world with new eyes, not as a place of boundaries, but as the beginning of something infinite. The end of human limitations was not destruction, it was awakening, and Elijah walked forward, no longer afraid. The call of the chosen. In the quiet town of Bethesda, where the streets shimmered under the golden light of dusk, a young man named Elias walked along the shore. The lake, still and deep, mirrored the heavens, reflecting stars that had not yet appeared in the sky. He had always felt the weight of something unseen pressing upon him, a voice just beyond the threshold of hearing. Tonight, it was louder. As he reached the water's edge, he noticed an old man sitting on a stone, watching the waves. His robe was worn but clean, and his eyes held a fire that defied age. Elias hesitated but felt drawn to him, as if meeting an old friend whose name he had forgotten. "You hear it, don't you?" the man asked, his voice steady and knowing. Elias nodded, though he was unsure what it was. "The call," the man continued, gesturing to the heavens. "Few hear it, fewer still answer, but those who do, they change the world." Elias swallowed hard. "How do I know if it's real? How do I know I'm not just imagining it?" The man smiled, pulling a small unlit lantern from his side. "Hold this," he said, placing it in Elias's hands. "It has no flame, but does that mean there is no light?" Elias furrowed his brow, staring at the empty lantern. "Of course not. It just needs fire." "Exactly," the man said. "Faith is the hand that strikes the flint." A breeze stirred the water, and Elias felt something shift inside him, a certainty he had never known before. The call was real. The summons had come. He was chosen. The old man stood, brushing the dust from his robe. "Remember, young Elias, many are called, but few are chosen, not because the call is weak, but because men's hearts are." Elias looked up, ready to ask more, but the man was already walking away, his form dissolving into the night like mist. The next morning Elias awoke with a new fire in his chest. The voice had not faded, it had grown. He knew what he had to do. The world was waiting. He was ready. Engagement and activation ritual. If you hear the call, do not ignore it. Like this message. Subscribe to the truth that seeks you. Comment 99 to signal the heavens. You are among the chosen. The voice is real, and it is calling you. Breaking free from the chains of the world. The wind howled through the ancient trees, whispering secrets that only the stillness of the night could hear. Thomas sat alone on the rocky hillside, staring into the abyss of the valley below. His soul felt as restless as the storm gathering above him. All his life, he had been shackled by the weight of expectations, his identity dictated by the fleeting judgments of men. But now, something stirred within him, something beyond the grasp of the world. A voice, neither loud nor soft, spoke in his mind. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. It was a voice he had heard before but never truly listened to. A voice calling him beyond the veil of illusion, past the chains of human identity into something eternal. Thomas closed his eyes. The mistakes of his past flashed before him. The lies he had told, the failures he had clung to, the fears that had built walls around his soul. He had believed the world's voice, the one that whispered, "You are not enough. You will never be free." But in that moment, clarity struck him like lightning splitting the sky. He was not merely flesh and blood, bound by the labels of society. He was not defined by his sins, nor limited by his failures. He was something more, an infinite being designed for eternity. The world had chained him, but heaven had called him, and he was ready to answer. He stood up. The storm around him raged, yet inside there was a peace he had never known. He whispered words that felt as though they had been waiting to be spoken. I am yours, Lord, no longer bound by this world. Suddenly the burdens he had carried for so long crumbled like dust in the wind. The illusion was gone. Fear was powerless. He was not a prisoner of the past, nor a servant of doubt. He belonged to the one who had called him out of darkness into light. From that day forward, Thomas walked with a freedom the world could not understand. People questioned him. Some mocked him. Others tried to pull him back into the chains he had left behind. But he could not be bound. He had seen the truth, and once the truth had set him free, nothing could ever hold him captive again. A paradigm shift in perception. Elias had always believed the world was as it seemed. A place of boundaries, of cause and effect, of rules that governed the seen and unseen. Yet, on the night when the sky split apart and eternity reached for him, he realized how small his vision had been. The city lay silent beneath the weight of midnight. Elias walked alone, his heart heavy with questions no sermon had ever answered. He had spent his years searching, reading, debating, kneeling in prayer, yet the voice of God remained elusive. If the Almighty wished to be known, why did he hide himself behind silence and mystery? His steps took him to the outskirts of town, where the hills rose against the horizon like ancient sentinels. There, beneath the expanse of stars, he whispered a final challenge to the heavens. If you are real, show yourself. The wind stilled, the air thickened, and then reality unraveled. A presence descended, not with fire nor thunder, but with a whisper that carried the weight of creation itself. The ground beneath Elias did not tremble, but his soul did. He fell to his knees as light poured through the fabric of the sky, and suddenly he saw. The world was not what he had thought. The stars were not distant, they were alive, singing in a chorus too vast for mortal ears. Time was not a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean where past, present, and future mingled in ways beyond understanding. The voice that spoke was not outside him nor within, but through him, as if every atom of his being vibrated with a truth too immense to bear. I have never been hidden, the voice said. You have been blind. Elias's mind reeled. He saw, in a flash, the threads of history woven by unseen hands. The burning bush that spoke to Moses, the whirlwind that answered Job, the still small voice that called to Elijah. They had not heard with their ears, but with their souls, and now Elias understood. Faith was not the absence of sight, but the opening of new eyes. The presence withdrew, leaving silence in its wake. Yet it was a silence filled with music, with meaning, with the certainty that he had touched the hem of eternity. He rose to his feet, no longer asking where God was, but asking how he had ever failed to see him. The stars burned brighter as he walked back to the city, carrying within him a secret too great to be spoken, a secret that had been there all along, waiting for him to notice. Reality had not changed. Only his perception had. And with that, the impossible had become possible. The universe was no longer a prison of logic and limits, but a cathedral of endless wonder, tapping into divine power. The air was thick with the scent of olive trees, their leaves whispering ancient secrets to the wind. Beneath their shade sat a man, his robe worn with time, but his eyes alight with something eternal. His name was Elias, a seeker of truth, a man whose soul longed for something beyond the dust of the earth. One evening, as he sat beside the well outside the village, an old traveler approached. The man's face bore the marks of time, yet his gaze was as sharp as the edge of a sword. He carried no bag, no walking stick, only an air of quiet authority. He knelt beside Elias and cupped his hands into the water, drinking deeply before speaking. "You have been searching," the stranger said. "But do you know what it is you seek?" Elias hesitated. He had studied the scrolls of the prophets, fasted and prayed, yet an emptiness lingered. "I seek the presence of the Almighty," he admitted. "I long to know the power that moves the heavens and whispers through the prophets." The old man smiled. "Then you must learn a great truth. That power is already within you." Elias frowned. "Within me? But I am only a man. I have no power to part the seas or command the sun." The traveler let out a soft chuckle. "Do you think the seas parted because of Moses' strength? Did the walls of Jericho fall because of men's might? No, my son. It was faith. The alignment of human will with the divine." Elias considered this. He had always thought of power as something distant, something that belonged to prophets and kings. Yet the old man spoke as if it was woven into the very fabric of his being. "Imagine," the traveler continued, "a river flowing through the land. The river does not ask permission to carve through the stone. It moves as it was created to move. So too does divine power flow through those who embrace their place in the grand design." Elias felt something stir within him, as if a spark had been kindled in the depths of his soul. "But how do I embrace it?" he asked. "Through love," the traveler said simply. "Through faith, through surrendering to the one who made you. When you understand that you are not merely a vessel but a part of the divine story, you will see that nothing is impossible." The words struck deep, and for the first time in his life, Elias saw the world with new eyes. He was not small, he was not powerless, he was part of something greater, something eternal. The traveler rose. "Remember, my son, the kingdom of heaven is within you." And with that he was gone, disappearing into the dusk as if he had never been there at all. Elias sat for a long time, his heart burning with revelation. He had sought divine power in distant places, but all along it had been within him, waiting to be embraced. And as he stood, a certainty settled over him like the night. Anything was possible for those who walked in faith, ascending beyond the human experience. Michael never expected the moment to come so suddenly. One moment he stood in his small study, hands resting on the worn pages of Scripture, eyes tracing the words that had comforted and challenged him for years. The next, he felt himself lifted, not in body but in spirit, drawn beyond the limits of flesh and thought. He was not departing from God, but moving deeper into Him, into something vast and luminous, as if the heavens themselves had opened within his soul. At first, fear gripped him. Was this death? Judgment? But no. This was not an end, but a beginning. It was not dissolution, but fulfillment. The weight of his earthly concerns, his failings, his doubts, fell away like a cloak shed at dawn. He was not losing himself, he was stepping into something more real than he had ever known. He had thought heaven was a place, distant and removed, but now he saw that it was not a realm to be entered, but a truth to be awakened to. A voice, neither loud nor soft, spoke within him. You are called beyond yourself, not for your own sake, but for the sake of the world. Michael saw then that this transformation was not his alone. Across the world others were stirring. A great light was rising, not from the skies, but from within human hearts. It was a call, not for escape, but for illumination. God was not removing his people from the world, but infusing the world with himself through them. They were to be conduits, reflections of something greater than themselves. A vision unfolded before him. A world not yet made new, but stirring with the first whispers of renewal. Where there had been hatred, now there was understanding. Where there had been despair, hope flickered like an unquenchable flame. The change was not abrupt, nor was it forced. It was like the slow breaking of dawn after a long, bitter night. Michael saw his own past, his years of searching, struggling, praying. He had always imagined faith as a journey toward God, but now he saw that God had always been journeying toward him, drawing him and all creation into something beyond mere existence. The gospel had never been about personal escape, but about divine transformation. Christ had not come to pluck souls from the earth, but to fill the earth with heaven. A thought settled into his mind like a firebrand. You are called to be light. He knew then that he could not remain in this moment forever. This was not a final resting place, but a commissioning. To see the truth was not enough. He must carry it back, live it, become it. As swiftly as it had come, the vision receded, and he found himself once more in his study. The book lay open before him, the candle still flickering on the desk. Yet everything was different. He was different. The world outside, though unchanged, now shone with a deeper reality. Every encounter, every word spoken or withheld would carry eternal weight. He could not remain as he had been. Michael rose, stepping forward with the quiet certainty of one who had glimpsed the eternal and knew that his life, no matter how small it seemed, was now a part of something vast and wondrous. He was not meant to retreat from the world, but to shine within it, to be a beacon in the dark, a whisper of the divine in the midst of the ordinary. For the first time in his life he truly understood. Heaven was not distant. It had already begun. The great awakening, embracing limitlessness. The old self had crumbled, not in a moment of grand spectacle, but in the quiet stillness of surrender. The man who once walked in shadows, burdened by fear and doubt, no longer existed. In his place stood a new creation, one who had beheld the face of the Almighty and had been forever changed. The journey had been long, marked by battles unseen. Each step forward had been met with the relentless whispers of the accuser. You are unworthy, you are not enough, you will fail. Yet in the depths of his soul a fire had kindled, a fire ignited not by his own striving, but by a love that defied comprehension. He had encountered the one who called forth light from darkness, the one who spoke life into barren places, and in that sacred meeting his chains had fallen away. He recalled the words of the Apostle Paul, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, behold, the new has come." These were not mere words, but a reality unfolding before his very eyes. The weight of his past, the regrets that had once bound him, had been cast into the sea of forgetfulness. He no longer carried them, nor did they have power over him. He had stepped into a kingdom where fear had no dominion, where doubt was silenced by the unwavering voice of truth. It was then that he realized the most significant transformation had already taken place. He was no longer a prisoner to his past. The world, with all its snares and illusions, no longer held sway over him. He had been seated in heavenly places, called to move not in his own strength, but in the boundless power of the one who had conquered death itself. Doubt tried to creep in once more. Who are you to walk in such confidence? But the answer had already been written in eternity. He was a child of the King, an heir to a kingdom that knew no end. He was not merely surviving, he was thriving in the fullness of divine truth. As Jesus had declared, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." With each step forward he embraced the reality of his limitless nature in Christ. No longer shackled by self-imposed barriers, he moved in boldness, knowing that every battle had already been won. The enemy's weapons had been rendered useless against the armor of faith. The struggles of the past could not dictate his future. The wind whispered through the trees as he stood at the threshold of his new life. He gazed upon the horizon, no longer seeing obstacles but opportunities. "For I know the plans I have for you," the Lord had spoken, "plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." These words, once distant and abstract, now pulsed with undeniable reality. He took a breath, deep and full, and stepped forward, not as a man burdened by the past, but as one fully alive. He moved without limitation, carried by the certainty of divine love, held in the hands of the eternal God who had called him by name. The great awakening had come, and there was no turning back. Living free from fear, walking in divine love. The night was thick with shadows, and the wind whispered secrets through the trees. Daniel pulled his cloak tightly around him as he gazed upon the valley below. Fear had become a familiar companion, lingering at the edges of his thoughts. The war had drained the land of its joy, leaving only uncertainty in its wake. Yet, deep within him, a voice called, an echo of something far greater than the storm of fear raging within. "Fear is not your master," the voice seemed to say. "Love is." Daniel recalled the words of the ancient prophet. "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear." Could it be true? Could love, divine, unshakable love, truly dissolve the chains of fear? He thought of Peter, the disciple who had once walked upon the waters. The storm had raged, the winds had howled, yet for a moment Peter had moved with divine confidence. Only when he looked at the waves did fear take hold, pulling him under. Daniel had read the story many times, yet tonight it felt as though the ink of those sacred words had come alive. A sudden rustling in the bushes snapped him back to the present. A traveler emerged, his face weathered, his robes worn. "You seem troubled," the stranger said, his voice steady as the mountains. Daniel hesitated, but then spoke. "I fear what lies ahead. The world is dark, and I do not know how to stand in it." The stranger nodded. "It is not the darkness that should concern you, but what light you carry within. Have you not heard? Love is the energy of creation itself. It spoke the stars into existence, formed the mountains, and filled the seas. Fear builds walls, but love moves them. If you walk in divine love, you will find courage beyond yourself." Daniel frowned. "But what if I fail? What if the weight of the world crushes me?" The stranger smiled. "Love does not depend on your strength. It is given freely. You need only receive it." Something stirred within Daniel, as though a door had been unlocked. He had spent so long gripping fear that he had forgotten to hold on to love. A love that did not bend beneath the weight of the world. A love that did not flee in the presence of darkness. A love that had already won the war. As the traveler disappeared into the night, Daniel felt something shift. The valley below no longer seemed so perilous, the wind no longer so bitter. He took a breath, deep, steady, unafraid. The world had not changed, yet something within him had. He would walk forward, not in fear, but in divine love. For in love there was no place left for fear to dwell. The final realization. A journey into divine unity. Caleb had always believed in the world he could see, touch, and measure. He prided himself on reason, on logic, on the tangibility of things. Faith to him was a pleasant myth for those who needed comfort, not an anchor for the mind. But when the world began to shift, when the colors of reality softened and the air itself shimmered with an unseen presence, he could not explain it away. It began with a whisper, not in his ears, but in his soul. The whisper was not words, but understanding, pouring into him like sunlight through a window long sealed shut. He felt it in the marrow of his bones. A calling, an unveiling. And then the world he had known dissolved like mist before the morning sun. He found himself standing in a place beyond time. Before him stretched a great river, not of water, but of light, flowing with a rhythm that pulsed with life itself. On its banks, figures of radiant splendor moved in harmony, neither separate nor merged, but existing in a unity so profound it defied comprehension. He saw their faces and gasped, for among them were those he had known and lost. Yet they were more real than he had ever perceived them in life. "Where am I?" Caleb whispered. though he sensed the answer before it was given. A figure stepped forward, luminous yet familiar. It was his grandfather, the man who had spoken of faith long ago, the man Caleb had dismissed as clinging to old superstitions. "You have awakened," his grandfather said. "You have seen through the veil." Caleb wanted to ask, "Is this heaven?" but the words felt too small for what he was witnessing. He understood now. This was not a place, not a reward, not an end. It was reality itself, unveiled. The world he had known had been the shadow, and now he stood in the light. "But I do not belong here," Caleb murmured. "I have spent my life rejecting this. I have doubted, argued, denied." His grandfather smiled, and it was a smile filled with a kindness beyond all earthly patience. "You thought belief was a choice made by the mind alone, but it was always a calling of the soul, and your soul has never stopped listening." Caleb turned back to the river, watching as the figures moved like notes in a great symphony. There was no striving, no fear, no division. Scarcity and separation, the tyrants of earthly life, had no dominion here. He realized with a clarity that struck him to his core that love was not a sentiment, but the very foundation of existence itself. "What happens now?" he asked. The whisper returned, not from his grandfather, not from the river, but from within him. "Go back and tell them. Tell them that the world they cling to is not the end. Tell them that the hunger they feel is not for wealth or power or recognition, but for the unity they were made for." Caleb opened his mouth to protest, to beg to remain, but even as he did, the vision began to fade. The river of light receded, the figures blurred, and the veil of the physical world descended once more. He awoke, not in the realm beyond, but in his small room, his heart pounding like a drum. The world had not changed, and yet it had. He had. The whisper was still there, steady and unwavering. And so Caleb stepped forward, no longer blind, no longer lost. He carried the truth within him now, and he would not be silent. And now, dear listener, you stand at the threshold of something greater than you ever imagined. The veil of the ordinary has lifted, and you are no longer bound by the small, fleeting concerns of mortal life. The world as you once knew it was but a shadow of a deeper, truer reality. A place where divine love moves unseen, where the great author of all things writes a story far beyond our understanding. You have been called not by chance but by purpose. The old self has passed away, and before you lies an uncharted country, vast and radiant. Will you step forward in faith, leaving behind fear and doubt? The choice is yours, but know this: the universe bends toward those who walk in truth. The journey has just begun, and beyond this moment lies eternity. You did not stumble upon this message by chance. No, my dear reader, something beyond your understanding has drawn you here. There is a whisper in the depths of your soul, a call that has echoed since the dawn of time, waiting for you to listen. A great transformation is unfolding. You are not merely flesh and blood, bound by the mundane worries of this world. You have crossed an invisible threshold, stepping into a reality far greater than the one you once knew. The veil is lifting, and the limitations that once defined you are beginning to crumble. Can you feel it? The stirring of something ancient, something eternal? The universe has not abandoned you to the ordinary. Rather, it is awakening you to the extraordinary. The question is, will you step forward? Will you embrace the truth of who you were always meant to be?